Ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining today's live SBA web conference. Please note that all participant lines will be muted for the duration of this event. You are welcome to submit written questions during the presentation, and these will be addressed by Gwen Davis during Q&A. To submit a written question, please use the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Choose All Panelists from the Send To drop-down menu. If you require technical assistance, please send a private note to the event producer. I would now like to formally begin today's conference and introduce Chris Eischen. Chris, please go ahead.
Thank you, Carla. Hello, everyone, and welcome to SBA's first Wednesday webinar series. For today's session, we'll be focusing on small business regulation and legislative updates, and by the end of the program, you should have a better understanding of this topic as well as the resources available to you. If you are new to our event, this is a webinar series that focuses on getting subject matter experts on specific small business programs, in this case, SBA legislative updates, and having them provide you with valuable information you can use in the performance of your job as an SBA employee, a member of the federal acquisition community, or a PTAC employee. We appreciate you taking this time to join us on the July edition of SBA's first Wednesday webinar series, and we hope you benefit from today's session. Now for a little background on the First Wednesday program. The program was initially created for contracting staff, which is why the training was called 1102 First Wednesday. The 1102 designated government series for contracting personnel was later dropped to be more inclusive of other GS series, as federal agencies increased the requirements for non-1102s to obtain their DIWEA and FACC certifications. Additionally, other federal buying activities, SBA staff, PTAC, and SBDC personnel who, after hearing about the training, requested access and were added to the list of participants. So that is why SBA's First Wednesday program is aimed at federal government employees and our resource partners like PTACs and SBDCs. So thank you to those of you who are repeat attendees, and welcome to those of you who are new to the program. As Carla mentioned, I am Chris Eischen, and I work as a Procurement Center Representative, or also known as PCR, and I am located in Kansas City, Missouri. Additionally, Ms. Gwen Davis, who is the PCR located in Minneapolis, Minnesota, will be reading your questions submitted during the program for our speaker to address at the end of today's session, and slide 3 includes both of our information. On to slide 4. Please note that all lines are on mute. However, you may submit questions anytime during today's session by entering them into the chat box on your screen, and these questions will be addressed at the end of our speaker's presentation. As most of you know, we have transitioned to the WebEx application and have been informed that some users may experience issues such as a blocked website or other error messages when attempting to access the conference login from their computer. If you are affected by this issue, please make sure you dial in and follow along with the slides provided in the email. We will ensure that page numbers are clearly stated so you can follow along. We are hopeful this issue will be resolved soon, and we apologize for any inconvenience. Now, if you are having any other technical problems, please call the AT&T support desk at the following number, 1-888-796-6118. This telephone number is also included in the email invitation for today's program and on slide 4 of the PowerPoint slide deck that accompanied the SBA email notifying you of today's training. Otherwise, just keep listening and follow along with the PowerPoint that accompanied the invitation for today. We will continually announce the page numbers so you can follow along. For more SBA small business program training, please visit the SBA Learning Center at www.sba.gov. Slide 5. The Association of Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, or APTAC, hosts a website where they post the First Wednesday programs. Since these sessions are recorded, you can re-listen to this program as well as the previous sessions by visiting their website, which is provided here on slide 5. Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, or PTACs, are a great resource, and partnering with your local PTAC for an industry day, sharing a sources sought, RFI notices, or referring small business concerns to a PTAC are just a few reasons why they are such a useful resource for acquisition personnel. Please contact your local PTAC for additional information. Slide 6 is the current program schedule for fiscal year 2018, and today's session on SBA legislative updates is the 10th topic in the series. As you'll see, we have added a couple new topics to our program list and improved on other topics that have been presented in the past. The participation continues to grow each month, and the positive word of mouth is greatly appreciated. We hope you find these topics interesting and applicable to your job. We are also in the process of coordinating the FY19 schedule, which will begin in October, so look for that schedule in the upcoming months. Slide 7. I'm sure that many of you will want to receive credit for today's training, so you'll be glad to know that today's session is worth 1 CLP. On the following slide, which is slide 8, you will find the training certificate. First, you'll manually fill in your name and then print the certificate from the PowerPoint to request credit for today's session. The PowerPoint was part of the SBA email invitation that you received for today's session, and please note that SBA does not track your CLPs or communicate with your training program coordinator regarding your CLP achievements. Now, several of you received the email information from a friend or a colleague, but if you want to receive this email directly from us, notifying you of upcoming First Wednesday webinar events, you can email us at SBA Learning, which is SBALearning@sba.gov. So in the subject line, you'll want to put the words add to list, and we will ensure that you're added to our distribution list. Now, slide 8, here is the certificate that I mentioned earlier. First, you'll want to access the PowerPoint presentation that was emailed to you. The one you see on your screen right now will not work, so you need to access the PowerPoint presentation. And then you will manually fill in your name. Next, within the print settings, you will select Print Current Slide, which will allow for only the certificate to be printed. And another reminder, SBA does not track your CLPs or communicate with your training program regarding your CLP achievements. So slide 9. Today's training has been assembled to address small business regulation and legislative updates, as well as provide you with the resources available for your use. Our speaker has graciously accepted our invitation, and he will be directing me to continue on to the next slide. As mentioned earlier, if you are unable to access the WebEx application, please follow along with the PowerPoint presentation that was included in the email for today's training. We will identify the page number so you can follow along. Also, please note that due to connectivity issues, some viewers may experience a delay as the slide changes on your screen. Now, I am pleased to introduce today's speaker to you, Mr. Michael McLaughlin, who is the Acting Director for SBA's Office of Policy, Planning, and Liaison. Michael, we appreciate that you could meet with us today, and I'll turn the program over to you now.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to, again, address this august group of small business professionals. The first slide in my presentation provides an agenda. The first point in there are pending FAR rules. Some of the rules that SBA finalizes require further implementation by the FAR Council in order to provide uniform guidance to contracting officers. The next bullet deals with pending SBA rules, which are rules that are in process that have not yet been finalized. And then we have SBA final rules, which actually have an effective date and are final. Then the next point, we're going to talk a little bit about NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act for 2018, and that authority often is a convenient vehicle to add revisions to other laws, such as the Small Business Act. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then there's something called Section 809. It was authorized, it's a panel that was authorized by Congress to take a look at acquisitions and make recommendations. And they've issued 2 out of 3 reports for the Defense Department, but it often affects other legislation, and sometimes the broad stroke is, well, let's do it for everybody. And then finally, I'd like to talk about category management, and the All Small Mentor Protege program, which provides some flexibility for contracting officers in reaching the small business goals in that environment. So if we could turn to the next slide on pending FAR rules. There are 5 that we're going to talk about today. Similarly situated entities, limitations on subcontracting, the non-manufacturer rule, the joint venture proposed rule, the multiple award contracting final rule, FAR Part 19, and contracts awarded and performed outside the United States, and lower tier subcontracting. The next slide, please. The rules were, I assume it's, yes, slide 12. Similarly situated entities and limitations on subcontracting and the non-manufacturer rule. The FAR case for that is 2016-11, and if you ever want to check on the status of a FAR case, the DPAP actually has a website listing all the open and closed FAR cases. So if you're curious as to where a particular case stands in the queue, the FAR case reference will help you locate that more readily. The title on this one is Revision of the Limitations on Subcontracting, and it implements SBA's final rule. It revises the limitations on subcontracting and the non-manufacturer rule. It implements SBA's regulatory clarifications concerning the application of the limitations on subcontracting, the non-manufacturer rule, and size determination of joint ventures. This particular rule is still in process by the FAR Council. The Civilian Agency Acquisition Council has sent it to OMB at Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. They've converted it to a proposed rule, and OIRA, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, is currently reviewing the rule. They have 90 days to do that, so it's possible that it could be coming free for further action in the near future. The next slide, 13, is the joint venture proposed rule. It implements the regulatory changes. It clarifies that 8A, the joint ventures, are not certified in the 8A program, and that 8A joint venture agreements must be approved by SBA prior to the award of an 8A contract. And this particular rule is still in process. It's awaiting concurrence from the Civilian Agency Acquisition Council. Slide 14. Multiple award contracting final rule. This case has been pending for some time. It's been amended several times by SBA due to rules that we've continued to publish. It implements our final rule, which provides government-wide policy for partial set-asides and reserves and setting aside orders for small business concerns under multiple award contracts. The Defense Acquisition Regulatory Council has agreed to the draft final FAR rule, and the Defense Acquisition Regulation staff is processing that at this time, so I'm hopeful that will be issued in the near future. I believe the next one is 15. This deals with FAR Part 19 and contracts awarded and performed outside the United States, having to do with the applicability of small business regulations. The intent of this change is to make the application of small business provisions at the option of the contracting officer overseas. We're still counting overseas spend towards the goals, but there are circumstances where it's not practical. So we do want to give the contracting officer the authority, so we don't want to say it doesn't apply. We want to give them the authority to do set-asides overseas without being encumbered by a requirement to justify why they're not doing it. The next one is 16, lower tier subcontracting proposed rule. It implements Section 1614 of the NDAA for 2014. We published our final rule late December 2016. This allows prime contractors to receive credit towards goals in their small business subcontracting plans for subcontracts awarded by their subcontractors. So the intent here is to have a regular, if there is an individual subcontracting plan, it only applies to individual subcontracting plans. They're required to have a small business subcontracting goal. So this would be a second goal for subcontracting. This would be a lower tier subcontracting goal that they would have to identify, but they would get credit towards the subcontracting, but they would have to meet both goals. The status on that one is they are required to report out on that this week, so hopefully that will reach a point where it can be published and go into effect. I'm losing track of the pages. Is the next slide number 16?
Slide 17.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
All right.
The pending SBA rules, we've got 4 major ones in the works right now. The first one dealing with a variety of topics, primarily limitations on subcontracting, but it does include the PCR review of DoD overseas contracts, providing double credit for local area small business set-asides associated with disasters. And it provides examples. We've given examples of good faith in subcontracting. This is to provide examples of bad faith in subcontracting. The service-disabled, veteran-owned small business, it addresses ownership and control. The WOSB certification that's been pending for a couple of years now, and the hub zone proposed rule. On 18, this is the NDA Authorization Act for 2016 and 2017, and this deals with the RISE Act, that's recovery improvements of small entities after disasters, and other small business contracting amendments. It does, the NDAA does limit the scope of review for PCRs for certain DoD procurements performed outside the United States. We had given DoD a waiver towards their goaling on some of their overseas contracts, but I guess they didn't feel that was sufficient, so they went back in and lobbied for legislation that gives them a complete waiver from that. So this implements that. It establishes that a failure to act in good faith in providing timely subcontracting reports shall be considered a material breach of the contract. Establishes procedures for the publication of acquisition strategies if there's consolidation or substantial bundling. And it solicits comments on exclusions from calculating compliance with the limitations on subcontracting, an agency's ability to set aside orders under set-aside contracts, contracting officers' authority to request reports on the prime contractor's compliance with limitations on subcontracting, and it provides examples of bad faith in subcontracting, in the subcontracting proposed rule. 18, service-disabled, veteran-owned small business ownership and control. What this does, it provides a definition, a common definition of ownership and control for these concerns, where we got together with VA and their Vet First contracting program. So what we've done is we've come up with common definitions, and it provides circumstances where a firm can qualify as a veteran-owned or service-disabled veteran-owned business when there's a surviving spouse or an employee stock ownership plan. 19. The women-owned small business.
20.
I'm sorry. My apologies. The women-owned small business certification proposed rule. It provides a certification program for women-owned small business and economically disadvantaged women-owned small business. There is, in legislation, an effort to end self-certification for the women-owned small business program. That hasn't been eliminated in this pending SBA rule. We are retaining a provision for third-party certification. We are recognizing a type of third-party certification by states and other agencies, and we're introducing for the first time certification by SBA. Now, this is significant in that women-owned small businesses was the only socioeconomic program that actually was paying people to do their certifications as well as provide other services, and now we're offering an alternative where they can get a free certification by SBA. And this rule is still in process. All right. The next chart, is that 21 or 22?
Slide 21.
21, thank you. The Hub Zone proposed rule, it's a very comprehensive amendment to the Hub Zone program. It provides some flexibility to retain Hub Zone residency for employees. So in order to help the businesses scale up and to meet their 35% requirement and to retain their status while they try to meet the minimum 20% threshold limit and continue to work towards getting back up to 35%. It moves to an annual recertification and representation at every offer level. So they still have to represent themselves when they make an offer, but it's an annual recertification, which is less burdensome on the Hub Zone. It provides them with more stability as a business. It makes it easier for businesses to do business with them as a subcontractor, as well as agencies to be able to turn to them and know that there's still a Hub Zone. And it amends several definitions, in particular for what is an employee. So it's a very comprehensive revision. It also provides some retention for redesignated areas where a Hub Zone was redesignated and is no longer in an area that would be considered a Hub Zone, but they'll retain their status until 2021. And it eliminates some ambiguities in the regulation itself. And all of this is to make it easier for the Hub Zones to understand and comply with the requirements and to provide stability to them as a business and make them more attractive to pursuing agencies. 22, the Veterans Administration is now able to have their protests and appeals heard by the SBA Office of Hearings and Appeals. It's not a big thing for our people. It's a capacity issue in OHA. So it's great that we're able to support VA and provide them with this service. We did issue, I think, am I up to 22 now?
This would be slide 22.
Okay. The SBA direct final rule, it provides conforming statutory amendments and technical corrections to our small business government contracting regulations. So this is something we're able to actually implement fairly rapidly, but some of it was just corrections and some technical changes. One of the most significant things here, and as a former contracting officer, I think this is great, is the mandatory set-asides for small business were traditionally linked to the micro-purchase and simplified acquisition threshold, but they were done so by dollar amount, $2,500 and $150,000. And now, instead of having to update that every time that the FAR is updated, now it's just basically a reference. So whenever the micro-purchase threshold changes, as it is changing to $10,000, we don't have to revise our rules to reflect that. We don't have to be out of sync with the FAR. And for the same thing for the simplified acquisition threshold, and now that that's going up to $250,000, we don't have to keep going back and changing the number. It's just a reference to the thresholds themselves. This is important in another way. For example, when these changes were being discussed, Canada had protested through their trade mission that they didn't want small business set-asides to follow the simplified acquisition threshold when it was increased. And that was actually upheld by the last administration. So by linking this directly to micro-purchase and simplified acquisition threshold, we can avoid that type of conflict with Canada and other trading partners. It updates the sole source dollar amounts for service disabled and hub zone small business regulations. For the 8A program, it's $7 million for manufacturing, $4 million for others. For service disabled and women owned, it's $6.5 million for manufacturing, $4 million for other, and for hub zone, it's $7 million for manufacturing and $4 million for others. So it brings us into sync with the FAR, and we're so little out of sync because the 8A program and hub zone are a little bit larger than service disabled and women owned. And the rest is a definition about indirect ownership, and that indirect ownership by U.S. citizens in the hub zone program is permitted by statute. So we've made that change in this direct final rule. And the next chart, the charts that follow are excerpts from the SBA direct final rule. They're provided for your reference. You can also go and take a look at what we published in the Federal Register at 83 Federal Register 12849. If you do Google search for that, you'll have that information in detail. But in the charts that follow, we have 121-103. How does SBA determine affiliation? And what this does is that provides or affirms that for mentor-proteges that they do not have, they have an exclusion from affiliation. I'm sorry, I've misspoken there. This particular one reflects the fact that as long as the protege qualifies as small for the size standard corresponding to the NAICS code. So it provides that level of clarification, but it also emphasizes that the mentor-protege, if they enter into a joint venture together, there is an exclusion from affiliation, and the size of the small business that is the protege is not impacted. The SBA direct final rule, this is simply just a clarification that paragraph only applies to paragraph C. The next chart, 121-406, how does a small business concern qualify to provide manufactured products for other supply items under a set-aside. And it does not apply to small business set-aside acquisitions with a value between the micro purchase threshold and the simplified acquisition threshold. So, and it references back to how those terms are defined in the FAR. So we're making immediate use of that new reference to, rather than specific dollar amounts, we're referencing the actual thresholds themselves. And again, with 120 on the next chart, 125.
27.
27, thank you. The limitations on subcontracting do not apply to set-aside contracts with a value that is greater than micro-purchase threshold, but less than or equal to the simplified acquisition threshold. The next chart, you just say that was, is this 28?
28, yep.
28. 125.18, what requirements must the service-disabled, veteran-owned small business meet? And it provides an exception. And it's basically, it's a typo. It's a renumbering of those paragraphs in both of those instances. BS 28, when may a contracting officer award sole source contracts? And it gives a dollar amount, the $6.5 million for manufacturing make and $4 million for all other contracts. 29, it removes the word unconditionally and directly, so that allows 51% ownership by U.S. citizens. So that is it allows indirect ownership. That's the thrust of that. And this continues on 30.
Slide 31.
I'm sorry, 31. Where we talk about the hub zone sole source, $7 million. Excuse me. And $4 million for other than manufacturing. And is it 32?
Correct.
That was a typo. We removed the word hub zone protege and substituted hub zone small business concern. All right. Then the next one, and again, I'm losing track of the slide number.
No problem. Slide 33.
Yeah, this is a discussion of it's not something that SBA is doing, but it's for your situational awareness. NDAA 2018, Section 846. It provides the implementation guidelines for an e-commerce portal. Some people have referred to this as the Amazon rule, but basically it provides that a commercial product is commercially available off the shelf, that procurements may not exceed the SAT level, and GAO will be doing a report on the effectiveness and impact of this 3 years after the contract is awarded. That contract is still pending. CSA is looking for more than one activity that is capable of doing it. On the next chart, we talk about the different phases, the timeline for implementation. Excuse me. And on the next slide.
Slide 35.
35 deemed to be an award of a prime contract, and it counts towards the goaling established under the Small Business Act if the purchase is made from a small business supplier. and agencies are not limited by this to restrict competition to small business concerns, but it does provide an additional avenue for small businesses to receive awards and to have those count towards their goals. The next chart talks about the increase in the simplified acquisition threshold and the micro purchase threshold, respectively $250,000 for the SAC and $10,000 for the micro purchase threshold. All right, the next chart.
Slide 37.
As it was before with $150,000, the limitations on subcontracting and the non-manufacturing rule will not apply to small business set-asides below $250,000. It defines a prime contract for purposes of the Small Business Act as a contract or contract action entered into by the federal government, and it talks about reserves, but basically that's not new content. It just basically it's new numbering of the paragraph. The next slide. This gets into a technical aspect, some technical aspect of the Hub Zone program, where it talks about how the state median income is used to calculate the status for non-metropolitan counties, how base closure areas that have been affected by a base realignment, they'll remain Hub Zone for at least 8 years, and their redesignated areas are eligible for 3 years. State governors may also petition for a Hub Zone designation, and the administrator can approve that. And if a Hub Zone loses, is subject to an examination and loses their eligibility, the Hub Zone application review, it's within 60 days of receiving a completed application. The Hub Zone recertification must take place no later than every 3 years. I'm sorry, I'm on the next chart. Here's the point I tried to discuss on the previous page. If a Hub Zone firm goes through a program examination and they're found ineligible, they have 30 days to show that they actually are qualified, but during that period of time, they may not compete for Hub Zone contracts. The Hub Zone maps are frozen until January 1st, 2020, and then they'll be updated at 5-year intervals. Again, that's aimed at trying to have some stability in the program. SBA must annually report on whether the Hub Zone is promoting economic development in distressed areas. Okay, and the next chart.
Slide 40.
Slide 40. This is I spoke about the Section 809 panel. They've issued 2 reports. They're working on a 3rd report. Second report revised the first one a little bit, but they don't exactly. They're not critical of small business and small business goaling. They think there should be more emphasis on innovation and small businesses that enhance warfighting capability. They recognize that there are a number of small businesses contributing to DoD's ability to function, such as security on bases, maintenance, all things of that nature. But I would say the big thing about that is their emphasis on bringing in small businesses that can give enhanced warfighting capability and introduce innovation through programs such as the SBIR, and different technology accelerators and consortia. It also recommends allowing a firm that outgrows the size standard to remain small for 3 additional years, and that's not something I think that I don't believe SBA would support that. Next chart, please. It's the about the American Relocation Connections. This is I mentioned this because it's of interest, because it was basically a protest with the BPA that orders must be set aside for small business if they're under the stat level. And what was found in this case was the protest was dismissed. All right. The next thing I was going to talk about is something that's very much in the wind. It's been, you've heard of strategic sourcing. There is an initiative that's been out there now for about 3 years for category management, and it basically takes 10 categories of government, common government spend, and basically sets them up as supermarket aisles. And it stocks the brands that they want you to use. Now, there are some generic brands at the end of the aisle, and they're allowing some use of those, and those are called Tier 1, Tier 2 type contracts. But they're best in class, they're Procter & Gamble type products are what they call their best in class contracts, and that's what they're encouraging agencies to do. If you're not what they call a Tier 1 or Tier 2 or best in class, which is Tier 3, you're called unmanaged spend, and they're trying to discourage that. And unfortunately, there's a lot of small business spend in that area. What we have communicated and what OMB now recognizes in their strategy and in their policy is that spend under management or category management is an initiative, and the small business goals are statutory requirements, and that agencies cannot ignore the statutory small business goaling requirements for small business and socioeconomic concerns in order to meet an initiative. That being said, we can use these big contracts to help to augment the goodness of what we're doing outside category management. 43% of the dollars that was spent on these best-in-class contracts for the small business concerns. The total of spend under management dollars in all tiers of the initiative actually exceeded the small business goal of 25.7%. And 75% of the contractors on these best-in-class vehicles are small businesses. Our issue is there aren't sufficient numbers of small businesses on these vehicles. Our issue is that there are not sufficient numbers or even any socioeconomic concerns like hub zones or women-owned small business on some of these vehicles. So our concerns are also is that there is not enough capacity for the small businesses that are on these vehicles. As more and more government spend is being directed towards the vehicles, the small businesses are likely to exceed the size standard and no longer be small businesses. So those are some of the issues that we're working with OMB on to make category management more successful and to be really a partner with the SBA in helping to achieve our small business goals. It's not an insignificant amount of money. Last year, $22 billion was spent on these best-in-class contracts. As a way to mitigate that, one of the things that we've called attention to is that SBA has 2 mentored protege programs, and we've encouraged them to consider the joint ventures that result from that in their market research. in their market research and their outreach, if they go out to industry and say, we can't find small businesses with the capacity or the skill set to perform effectively for our mission requirements, that can be an invitation for large businesses that have performed in the space, but maybe they're not going to get the next award because now they're trying to add small businesses. Maybe that large business can enter into a mentor-protege agreement with a small business, and as a joint venture, they can get together and provide the capacity and the skill set and the performance history to be awarded one of these new BIC awards. Both of the SBA mentor-protege programs, the All Small and the 8A program, provide an exclusion from affiliation. So the joint venture that results from such a marriage would still be considered small. So if the protege is a hub zone, the joint venture takes on the nature of a hub zone. And the same goes for women-owned, service-disabled vets, or small disadvantaged businesses, or even a small business. And the advantage on doing this is that it can help strengthen the industrial base. It increases the transition efficiency. If you have a small business that is providing cybersecurity, this is a real-world example, but they're not on the OASIS contract and the competition is taking place, the recompete is taking place on OASIS, and this small business is not on OASIS, they're kind of out of luck. But they might be able to compete with a large business and perhaps be more competitive when the on-ramp for OASIS opens again. By having a joint venture with a small business, the resultant award is credited to small business, and it provides the capacity in best-in-class contracts that doesn't exist there today. So how does this help the contracting officers? It strengthens their acquisition strategy. It makes it more robust. The small business teaming maximizes small business participation as contractors, and that can be as prime as well as sub. And it helps agency heads mitigate the effects of consolidation. It facilitates competition, buying among small businesses. It avoids unnecessary and unjustified consolidation or bundling. And it provides small business proteges with a competitive advantage, and mentors gain access to set-aside. You can go to the last chart, what I refer to as my mentor-protege mento chart.
Slide 47.
47. And I'll deal with the first two lines because actually I'm being called to a panel discussion in about 3 minutes. But let's say a large business wants to compete, but the next time this requirement comes out, it's a hub zone set aside, multiple awards. Well, if they're in a joint venture with a hub zone could compete on its own for the business, or the joint venture can compete. But the large business, as a large business, would not be able to compete for that. And if you follow over to if there's a small business set aside, even though their joint venture is with a hub zone, the hub zone is a small business. So the large business, they're able to compete as a partner on a joint venture with that hub zone for just a small business set aside. Now, this does not prevent the hub zone joint venture or the hub zone from also participating in full and open competition. So that's there's nothing negative about the association. And again, they have an exclusion from affiliation, so they get to compete as a small business. And in the next two lines, they talk about the example of a large business and a women-owned small business program participant, as opposed to a women-owned small business non-program participant. With the program participant, they can participate in women-owned small business set-asides. Also, they can participate in small business set-asides and full and open competition. If you drop down to the bottom, a women-owned small business that's competing on its own, that is not a program participant, they can't participate in a women-owned small business set-aside. It takes a couple hours to apply to the women-owned small business program, so I don't know why we have that, but I think it's a matter of education. But a women-owned small business can and they do compete with small business set-asides and full and open, and they are competitive. If you take a look at the about mid-page, I have an illustration of what a large business could compete in a world of set-asides. They can only compete in the full and open. So there's an enormous incentive for large businesses to compete in each of these categories if they should be given consideration to a mentor-protege relationship. They get to help develop a small business, and they gain access to set-asides that they would not ordinarily qualify for. I have a couple minutes left if there are any questions, and I can also respond to any written questions received after the call.
Sounds great. Gwen, if you've got a couple questions ready, I know Mike's got to leave here in a couple minutes, so if you have a couple questions ready for him, we could get those answered.
I actually have gotten 6.
Okay.
The first one might have been covered on that last slide. Can we expand the issue of set-asides under multiple award schedules, and what are the considerations?
Well, that actually, that is a question that's out there with one of our rules right now, is asking about set-aside on multiple award schedules. So we're looking for comment on that. Our current policy is that if you have small businesses that are on an multiple award schedule, or they're in an IDIQ contract, you you really for a multiple award contract, if they're on there, we don't want to have one socioeconomic program taking precedence over another. There are some contracts out there where GSA would like to have set-asides within a set-aside, and we're not on the same sheet with that, but we are seeking some comment on that.
Okay. Next question is, do you know when the FAR is going to be changed for the new thresholds?
I'm sorry, for what?
For these thresholds. Doesn't state which thresholds, but
I don't have the timeline for that. I think they're expediting that, but we can try to look that one up for you.
Okay, and that goes along with the next question about time frame for the proposed rule for WOSBs to be out.
That's still in-house right now. We're going through some difficulties with OMB, OIRA right now, where they've got some questions about the economic impact of this. So we have to provide an analysis that they concur with.
Okay. Next question. Does the SBA direct final rule amend the SBA Act, or does it amend the 13 CFR?
Congress amends the Act. We amend the CFR.
Okay. Does the NMR apply only to total small business set-asides, or also set-asides for other socioeconomic categories?
It applies to all socioeconomic categories.
Okay.
It applies to small business, and socioeconomic categories.
Okay. The limitation of subcontracting does not apply for services below the SAT, correct? So a small business can be awarded a contract even if they don't perform 50% or even only 10%?
Yep.
Okay. And the last question, on slide number 36, you noted that NDAA 2108, Section 806, increased micro-purchase threshold to $10,000. Does the threshold also apply to DOD and purchases subject to the SBA and DBA?
That's a good question. We can research that further. DOD often has exceptions.
Okay, and that was the last question that I had.
All right, I have to run. Thank you all very much.
Michael, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
And once again, thanks again, Michael, and we appreciate him providing this great information today. And thank you to all of you who participated in our program. I see a couple questions did roll in here late. What we will do is we will send those directly to Michael, and we will get that information out to the individuals who sent those as well. So if you do have any additional questions, or there were some questions that may have been overlooked, please send an email directly to us at sbalearning@sba.gov, and we will coordinate that and get you the answers that you need. So once again, you also have Michael's information there as well, so feel free to reach out to him as well if you have any direct questions. Otherwise, thank you. Appreciate the input and your participation, and have a great day.
Thank you for joining today's conference. The session has now concluded, and you may disconnect.